Okay, session. As a panelist, okay.
Yeah. Got your transfer now. So you go right to the share today. Eh? Quelle was that? So very she showed up me. You can be. You can say that. Because I can't get. If you're not you're working as a yeah. We start in next 3 minutes. Okay, so it will not be interfering. We have to mute your mic so you can use this one.
Okay, my mic was muted. So this is the mic. Let me reduce the volume of your mic. So you're oh sorry. Okay. Okay. So your computer will have the sound, will play the for people online. Okay. All right. It's almost time. Hello.
Oh, hello, Charisma.
Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise.
Sorry, I couldn't travel this year.
Oh, coming in person.
No, coming to Lagos.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry. I was like, who's coming in person and who's going to be online? But I'm looking forward to each of the papers. Everybody's topic is really interesting. So I see Abiodun is online and Bamtele. Yep, Bamtele. So we're waiting for Ibukunoluba and Mariana Fonseca. Practice sharing slides. Let's see. Is everybody able to share their slides? Oh, okay.
Do you want me to send them? Or can I share
No,
on the screen?
you should be able to share directly on the screen. Maybe just make sure sharing is enabled, but you should be able to. Yeah.
Okay, let me check. Yes, I can. Yeah, I need to send a request.
It's not letting you share right away.
No, I need to send a request, and which I did now.
Okay, let me see. It's telling her that she has to request. Is it coming to you? Because I don't see the. Oh, okay. Try it again. Okay, try it. Can you try it again?
Yes, it works automatically. Can you see?
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm having my lunch.
Oh, no, please take care of yourself.
Why start now? Should we start now? Yeah, go on. Yeah, we're starting now. Next section. So, like, you can start now.
Okay, I'm just running.
Charles, please.
Okay, hold on one second. I'm just trying to share my screen. Okay. For some reason, okay, let me see, share. Okay, all right. And then, let's see. Okay. All right, good afternoon. Thank you. Welcome to climate and our panel on climate and the environment. Climate and the environment is an important topic about climate change and how much more needs to be done. So here we're responding to climate crises and to respond to emergencies. Today's panel, we have 5 papers to everyone in I know at least 3 of us are here. We are going to talk about expanding history, culture, philosophy, technology as it relates to the environment, climate change, and adaptation. We have 5 papers on the panel, but I think there are 3 of us here. So we might have a little more time to talk. I was going to say 15 minutes each, but maybe we can go to 18 minutes per paper to allow for Q&A. So if each person can speak for roughly 15 minutes, and then, you know, with the time it takes to change, that should give everybody time to present, and then we'll roll questions till the end. I will introduce each speaker, and then they will go ahead and present, and at the end we'll take questions. All right, so we'll get started. I'll be the first speaker on today's panel. And the title of my paper is From Badagry to Lagos, Marinage, Indigenous Knowledge, and Ecological Resilience in Colonial and Contemporary Contexts. So I'm just going to start my show. Here we go. Oh, okay, there we go. All right, perfect. So, in this paper, I talk about how in the sprawling informal settlements of Lagos, residents who rebuild their homes after government-forced evictions echo resistance strategies that emerged centuries earlier along the same coastal landscapes. So during the height of the transatlantic slave trade, when millions across West Africa were displaced, communities developed practices of geographic refuge, autonomous governance, and ecological adaptation that enabled survival in marginal terrain. These African forms of marinage, less documented than their better known counterparts in the Americas, created templates for resistance that persist today, where marginalized communities transform hostile environments into sites of resilience and cultural preservation. In the context of accelerating climate change and persistent socio-ecological inequalities, I argue that understanding historical and contemporary strategies, these kinds of strategies, is critical for reimagining urban resilience in African cities. On April 19, 2017, thousands of people living in the Atoro-Gabame fishing community of Lagos were forcibly displaced. This followed the destruction of nearly 5,000 homes in March by local authorities. On this interactive map I created on planet.com, it compares the area of Atoro-Gabame in March before its destruction. And in that small yellow circle there, you can see thousands of fishing boats and small houses marking the community. On this next slide, this shows how the area, how it is today. where it has been filled in and subdivided. Also visible is the rapid expansion of land reclamation around Lagos Lagoon, illustrating the demand for prime real estate, the rapid pace of urban transformation, and the struggle for the right to stay put facing working class migrants and urban poor in Lagos. Despite court rulings in their favor, the waterfront area that once sustained this community and their livelihoods has been turned into a new luxury development. Activists have called the illegal eviction a land grab. Instead of upgrading informal settlements, the government has promised the demolition of all shanties. In response to evictions like in Ototo Gabambe or earlier in Makoko in 2012, or the infamous Maroko forced evictions that it was the largest in Nigerian history and over 300,000 displaced. And going back to the colonial period when slum clearance schemes were perpetrated in the name of health and safety, each time communities take each other in, continue to encroach on and rebuild, returning to the margins for livelihoods, economic necessity, cultural and spiritual connection, using their environmental and spatial knowledge. These communities are not just responding to housing shortage, they're asserting their historic claims to landscapes that have served as refuge for centuries. And you can learn more about the specific incident in impacting Ototo Gabambe or the movement for the waterfront to preserve the waterfront communities using these hashtags on social media. So what is marronage? It comes from the term maroon, which originates from the Spanish word cimarron, which means fugitive or wild one. It's a term that was used to refer to escaped Africans in the Americas who formed independent communities during the transatlantic slave trade. So in this paper, I'm using this, what I call urban environmental marronage. So traditionally, marronage studies focuses on Caribbean quilombos, the Brazilian maroon communities, Surinamese bush societies, even the Great Dismal Swamp in the North Carolina, United States, Florida, and parts of the border with Mexico. But what's missing in this research is African marronage during the slave trade and coastal refugee communities and environmental knowledge as resistance as practiced on the continent. So I'm building on scholars who've talked about urban marronage and talked about maroon ecologies and bringing them together to talk about urban environmental marronage. In Lagos, colonial infrastructure legacies from racialized water systems to flood-prone spatial segregation continue to structure ecological and social vulnerability in post-colonial and the contemporary, creating conditions where communities have to develop these strategies to survive. So in this paper, I'm bringing together the intersection of indigenous ecological knowledge, colonial legacy, and contemporary forms of resistance under this term, to look at how they've historically and presently adapted to environmental and social displacement in cities. So I want to begin with a timeline of marronage across Lagos, covering the 1790s and 1850s, the 1850s to the early 1900s, and into the contemporary. So in terms of fugitive slaves, despite the British abolition of the Slave Trade Act in 1807, the external slave trade continued operating largely illegally through Lagos and Badagry until its latest 1851. While the cessation of slave exports led to what Ojo documents as, quote, the retention of more slaves within Yoruba land and their diversion to local farms and production centers. This persistence of domestic slavery created conditions requiring marronage as fugitives needed to know the environment in order to survive in the coastal margins. And these environments provided opportunities for concealment, such as mangrove forests as hiding places, which required understanding tidal courses and freshwater sources and sustainable forms of extraction. Yoruba agricultural practices also adapted to withstand the colonial encounter. So that included soil management techniques, seasonal farming cycles, and so forth. The series of regional conflicts that intensified during the 19th century, including the Owu Wars of the 1820s, the destruction of Ijaye in the early 1860s, and the Ifole in Abeokuta, known as the housebreaking riots in 1867, created massive population displacements that brought diverse groups to the coast. So over time, Lagos served as a refuge for people fleeing regional warfare and slave raids from as early as the 16th century, with the island offering safety from conflicts intensifying in the Yoruba interior. And these war refugees often arrived in large groups and formed distinct communities in coastal settlements. So the destruction of Ijaye led to refugees settling in Lagos Okearin section, subsequently named Ijaye Port and Ijaye Street, while Egba Christians fleeing the Ifole War were settled at Ebute Metta in a quarter known as Ago Egba. And lastly, I'll mention debt bondage as another form of another source of marriage. So the persistence of pawnship or iwofa and related forms of debt bondage throughout the colonial period created ongoing conditions of economic displacement that required survival strategies. Ojo documents how practices like panyaring or the seizure of goods or people for debt continued and became more prominent as a method of debt enforcement following the abolition of the external slave trade. So I'm looking for these practices as and how people resisted those practices as sources of marriage and how those strategies persisted across time. In terms of colonial legacy and of infrastructure and ecological violence, Ademide Lucy Adewuyi talks about cartographic violence, the way that colonial efforts to map, control, and extract resources from coastal environments reframed indigenous geographies, turning land into extractable and controllable commodities while erasing indigenous spatial knowledge. And her whole project is about putting indigenous settlements back onto actual maps using the archive. The continuation of displacement conditions throughout the colonial period through these various forms of bondage and regional conflicts that I just talked about meant that marriage practices adapted over time rather than disappeared. And other scholars have talked about the legacy of uneven development left by colonial infrastructure and subsequent ways that communities adapted. So what are these marriage infrastructures? What do they look like? Some key features of them are thinking about the 400-mile lagoon system, continuous waterborne, how it provided continuous waterborne communication, how you had to understand tidal forces, multiple sites of refuge connected by water, which allowed communication over long distances, and then different political pressures over time that led to, at various times, either Badagry or parts of Lagos being sites of refuge for communities fleeing conflict in the interior. Some of the survival strategies, as I mentioned, include lagoon navigation, using the mangroves as a resource, adapting to seasonal floods, and traditional water and food systems. So what does that look like today in what some scholars call climate apartheid? Climate apartheid meaning thinking about the contrast between the investment in a massive site of land reclamation like Echo Atlantic versus one of the 200 known blighted areas in Lagos, such as Badia. So we're talking about spatial segregation and elite environmental protection while displacing people in their livelihoods, given the increased value of property around the waterfront. So we can look at informal settlements as contemporary maroon communities, given this context of climate apartheid. So historically, we're talking about refugees seeking coastal refuge, environmental knowledge for survival, and autonomous community formation. In the contemporary period, we're talking about how informal residents manage their own water, energy, build flood resilient architecture, their means of informal governance, and how they adapt to a changing climate, even without state support. As one person I interviewed in my dissertation research back in 2009, every household is a local government. Another strategy of marriage is cartographic marriage, where communities are creating counter narratives through mapping. So these are pictures that me and my students took working with Nigeria's Slum Settlements Federation and Justice Empowerment Initiatives in 2019, where communities were literally, if you look at the map in the middle, is a satellite map of the area of Makoko. And on the right, you can see how activists literally use cardboard cutouts and map every single house, every single building, commercial property, even extending out into the lagoon. And they use that as a form of negotiation with the state government by identifying the residents, their livelihoods, who goes to school, what they pay. This is how they strategize. And on the left are just a beautiful picture of two of the activists who were evicted from Matoto Gabame, who are now volunteering to help save other waterfront communities. Briefly, I'll talk about Badagry as a site of heritage preservation as a form of environmental marronage. You can see here relics from the Moby Museum. Efforts to preserve the heritage of the transatlantic slave trade began to appear in West African port cities like Badagry, Cape Coast, and Ouidah in the mid-20th century. They were preserved by descendants of slave trading families who circumvented the British 1852 edict that all instruments of the slave trade be destroyed. So the interesting thing here is that that preservation of heritage, both in the form of physical relics and the preservation of stories through ritual and dance, have come to sustain an economic form of livelihood for people in Badagry, and has made it a site of tourism, but that has also made it vulnerable to plans by the state to redevelop Badagry. So this is a rendering of a planned redevelopment similar to Echo Atlantic. It's called Destination Badagry. It has galvanized a lot of support among local leaders, chiefs, and others. Other promoters of Badagry slave heritage. My computer is running out of charge, but I'm just going to keep going because I'm almost done. And then we'll move on to the next presentation. In the next slide I was going to show was just another rendering of the Badagry Marina plan. During the Q&A, when I get my computer back on, if anybody wants to see these slides, I can pull them back up. And again, while these projects have led many to applaud the state government's interest in improving living conditions in the state, the question is improved for who? So there's a dark underside to redevelopment that echoes the gentrification taking place in Echo Atlantic and elsewhere around the world in advanced capital economies where green initiatives combine with business as usual land development that serve the interests of capital. There's a Vale in Badagry that I quote on the next slide, who talks about, the feeling, how there's distrust between the government and community and how they feel that they've been completely abandoned. And so in Badagry, ritualized marronage or cultural practices as environmental marronage include mangrove ecosystem maintenance, freedom dances, preserving the memory of the slave trade, and resisting appropriation of their cultural tourism by the state. So it brings up questions of who controls space, memory, and the environment, but people in Badagry are asserting their right to that history. And so lastly, reading landscapes as archives of resistance is important. Now I'm going to show some slides of the Makoko Iwaya Waterfront Redevelopment Plan and how their communities in Makoko articulated what they wanted to see for their future. However, I was going to contrast that with a slide image, just an article that came out in 2025 this year in The Guardian of the latest plan to transform the Makoko waterfront into a mixed-use development stream called FBT Coral Estate. It's a 54 hectares of land close to here at Unilag and facing the third mainland bridge. And it's going to be a sports center, car parking, business hotel, yacht club, convention center, banquet hall, but nothing for the people. And so people are worried about displacement, and the residents of Makoko have already launched a lawsuit against this development in the state. So lastly, I just want to end had an image of one of the renderings that came out of this Makoko Wai'o waterfront development plan that is not going forward. But it shows what a vision of the city could look like if this knowledge and if the will of the people who live in Makoko would be brought to fruition, what it could look like and what sustainable and adaptable, resilient development could look like. And the question I want to leave us all with is, how do we plan the green city from below? So thank you, everyone, and apologies for my computer dying during the presentation, but thank you. All right. So oh yeah, the next person who will be presenting today is Abiodun Afolabi from Adekunle Adesin University. And he will be presenting the paper, Reimagining the Yoruba Conception of Work in the Age of Environmental Degradation. Take it away.
Yeah, hello, good afternoon, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to be connecting online this afternoon for the LSA conference. I'm sorry I was not able to make it. No thanks to my own ill health, but I'm glad that at least I have the opportunity to share my thoughts on the subject of the philosophy of work and its imperative for environmental sustainability. I'm sorry, the title of my paper has slightly changed. Let me try to share my slide. I'm sorry, I'm struggling to see how to do that here. Okay, all right. Okay, I don't know if my slide is clear. Can you see? Can you see my slide? Hello, are you hearing me? Can you see my slide? Hello?
Hello?
Yeah,
Yes.
Can you see my slide?
Yes.
Yes, we can see.
All right, thank you very much. So the title of my paper has slightly changed. I just had to align that with my my clear aims and objectives. So now what I'm trying to present now is the Yoruba philosophy of work and its imperative for environmental sustainability. And what I'm trying to do in this particular paper is to think about the age of environmental crisis that human beings have found themselves in. And when you think about whether it is climate change, whether it is pollution, whether it is biodiversity loss, there is something that is complicit, that is not oftentimes mentioned by scholars in environmental ethics and political ecology, and that is the work culture. Of course, I understand that a number of times systems and structures has been fingered as the cause of the environmental crisis, but the very conception and the practice of work has not been popularly reflected upon when it comes to the subject of environmental sustainability. And so I'm trying to look at the modern ecological crisis and the need to rethink our conception of work. And I'm thinking that the Yoruba philosophy of work would offer some insight into the ethical, the communal, and sustainable work ethics. And the purpose of doing this is to point out the fact that indigenous perspectives can enrich global environmental discourse. So to start with, I think it is very, very important to do some sort of conceptual clarification, because oftentimes the very concept of work and labor has been used interchangeably. And maybe on the sideline too, you can also involve the very concept of job. And in this modern world, we have this concept, work, whether labor, whether job. They are oftentimes used interchangeably. But for the purpose of this work, while it is possible for me to still use all of these concepts in the literal way, but I still think that labor work, they are slightly different. And for the purpose of in the context of environmental sustainability, it is much more important to draw those distinctions. So when we talk about labor most times is often focused on the kinds of activities that we'll do just in exchange for either monetary services, monetary gains, or sometimes it could be in gains which are not clearly monetary. And one thing that is common in the very activity of labor is that it is repetitive and it is oftentimes survival based. And for all that we know, there is a tendency for labor to be exploitative, and that is why in every of our workplace, we have labor unions who would always guard against this tendency of labor to be exploitative. Work, on the other hand, has been seen in its classical sense as a purposeful, as an ethical, and as a socially engaged activity. And so when we think about work, Hannah Arendt talked about work as the kinds of unnatural activity that we engage in. And of course, she sees work as the sort of activities that brings about the kinds of products that we use on a daily basis. So work is inherently connected to the very activity that humans engage with on a daily basis. And so in this context, I mean in the context of this work, the Yoruba context, work is called Ishe, and it is an essential activity performed in pursuit of human well-being, but it includes a spiritual and a communal dimensions. And as I would point that out later in the paper. And when I am also looking at this very concept of work, it is also important to strike it that I am looking at that concept in the context of environmental sustainability. So when we think about environmental sustainability, it should be clear that there is a demand to rethink the intention and the impact of labor. That is, whether you're talking about labor or maybe you're looking at it in the classical sense of work. So there is a need to do that. And in doing this, of course, this is a work that is largely philosophical. And so it is not a work that I did so much of the excavation or any ethnographic studies, but I reflected on this particular issue, riding upon the works of philosophers who have thought about and reflected upon the very idea of work. So we have one, Aristotle. Aristotle looked at work, and when he was trying to look at work-related activities, he distinguished them by categorizing some work-related activities as often focused on wealth accumulation. That is, they are often focused on the economic result, the economic ends of work. So he characterized those kinds of work as the chremasticics. And the second kind of characterization from Aristotle is the one he calls oikonomia. That is, the work that does not only look at the economic gains, it's a work that is focused on the communal well-being and the well-being of others in general. So in essence, the second kind of work for Aristotle is higher in purpose. And for Aristotle, when you're thinking about the eudaimonia, the flourishing life, this is the kind of work that one should focus on. And Karl Marx is also a popular philosopher whom a lot of us would have known and related with. And when he talks about work, his idea of work was more about trying to promote the capabilities of human beings, the potentials of human beings. And so work in the capitalist era, Karl Marx identifies as a work that has alienated workers, laborers, from their inherent potential. So if work has those characteristics in that very particular era, Karl Marx think about the fact that work should not only give workers a daily wage, but should also help workers to open up their inherent potentials, their inherent capabilities. And the last of philosophers that I looked at is Otto Schopenhauer. Otto Schopenhauer talks about the fact that when it comes to life in general, there is the endless striving, endless pursuit for particular goals. And in this pursuit of goals, there is always the tendency for human beings never to be satisfied, even when they achieve their goals. So this endless dissatisfaction to always pursue a greater goal, a higher goal, could always lead to the suffering of human beings. And so in that regard, what Schopenhauer was talking about when it comes to work is that work should not be tied to a goal that is individualistic. Else, it would always results to a situation where human goals are changing at every point in time, and there is an endless pursuit of these goals to the point that it could lead to some sort of suffering for human beings. And these global reflections on philosophy, one thing is lacking there that I often see, and I have noticed that in literature, is that none of them has, in a way, connected work to the environment. That is, the relationship between work and environment has been lacking in those reflections on work. And I have decided to look at that in the philosophy of, in the Yoruba thought system, and to really tease out the idea of work in the Yoruba thought system, we need to look at their ontology. And when we talk about ontology, ontology is trying to reflect upon either the ways in which the Yorubas have lived their lives in such a way that they could reflect these kinds of values. And so in the Yoruba traditional worldview, work, Ishe, is part of their essence. And for starters who would want to understand the very line of Yoruba worldview is that when it comes to the entities in the world, they have a sort of interconnections. So whether it is human beings, the spirits, the deities, and nature, all of those entities are interconnected according to the Yoruba worldview. And so for that reason, work, Ishe, is linked to Ori, I mean destiny in this time. So the Yoruba worldview believes that human beings have come to this world with an assigned role, with an assigned task, such that it is the responsibility of human beings to find out what role, what kind of work that destiny has assigned to them. And work also confers human personality and social status for the Yorubas. It confers human personality because a number of times when it comes to defining who a human being is in the Yoruba traditional worldview, it is essential for you to talk about the kinds of capabilities, the kinds of abilities that such human beings have to engage in work-related activities. And so you would find out that when it comes to calling anybody it requires that they are able to perform those work-related activities. And of course, this suggests the metaphysical relevance of work in Yoruba traditional worldview. And again, when we are trying to look at the Yoruba proverbs and some of the Ifa teachings, they affirm work as dignified, as communal, and as essential. And examples of some of those proverbs have been listed there. The first one there is Ishe, and this was the title of one of Dio Fagunwa's poems, children poem, which literally eulogizes the very character of work and appraises the very role of work in the Yoruba human life. That is, work is an antidote of poverty. Another one of those proverbs is that one's labor feeds one. This is also a proverb that reflects deeply the character and the value that human beings in that traditional Yoruba settings put to work. And the third one is Isheki Dedeshe penury wouldn't suddenly occur. And so here we also see a proverb that eulogizes, that appraises the very role that human beings in Yoruba traditional settings regard work. And in all of these ontology, there are three important principles that I have teased out that characterizes Yoruba philosophy of work. Number one is work is regarded work as dignity. That is, there is the dignity in labor in Yoruba philosophy of work. And so Yoruba philosophy does not appraise anyone who does a job that is less dignifying. Jobs like stealing, like cheat, that requires stealing, that requires that people cheat and perhaps submerges others. Those are not the kind of work that Yorubas really appraise. So the dignity of labor is very, very essential in the Yoruba philosophy of work. In the poem of Michel Ogunshe, you would see Michel Ogunshe, and just like that, that particular poem eulogizes or talks about the dignity of work that is expected in Yoruba traditional settings. The second one is work is regarded as a sacred entity. And so work is tied to the destiny of human beings and to divine purpose. So every now and then in the Yoruba traditional settings, the work that individuals do, the work that human beings do, are not just treated as a secular activity. It is deeply connected to some sort of divine purpose. So people are conscious of the divine assignments that they are entrusted when dealing with work. And the third one is that work is also communal, because it ensures that it is not just only the individual that is meant to be prosperous from work, it also has some sort of connection to the prosperity of the community. And so you will find out that in doing work in the Yoruba traditional settings, there is the idea of mutual support and even equity. That is the idea that it is expected that as much as one is being successful in their work, there is the need to think about those who are less successful and to think about ways in which they can be helped. And the question will come from these three principles. That so where is the place of wealth, or where is the place of the economic gains when it comes to the Yoruba philosophy of work? In Yoruba philosophy, wealth is not the highest aspiration. Rather, it is a byproduct of legitimate work and good character. So in essence, what I'm saying is that when it comes to wealth, wealth is not really the ultimate when it comes to Yoruba philosophy of work. And to now tease out from that Yoruba philosophy of work, the connections or the implications that has for environmental sustainability. So while the Yoruba worldview holds a spiritual respect for nature, their ontology of work does not explicitly integrate environmental sustainability. And that is the task that I have engaged in when it comes to addressing that connection. So Yoruba workers perform rituals that show respect for sacred natural spaces, whether in farming, in hunting, in agriculture. You will find out that there is some sort of reverence that the Yorubas have towards those resources, those environmental resources. And the second idea here is that when it comes to farming, there are certain ideas that suggest that the Yorubas prioritize ecological balance. So the idea of crop rotation is very, very essential to farming activities in traditional Yoruba settings. And so this suggests that when it comes to moderation, when it comes to allowing the land to regain its nutrients, the Yorubas have been these kinds of attitudes in their own farming techniques. And also, there is also the idea that land use is a communal property. And very much unlike what we find out in these days, in this modern time, where land has become a commodity that has been exploited for so many things. In the Yoruba traditional settings, the community owns the land. In fact, land is something that every individual has the opportunity to at least make use of. If you as an individual is in need of a land, it is possible for you to reach out to the community who could give you a particular portion of land to use for your farming purposes. So that discourages exploitation, and exploitation has been the very bane of the modern environmental crisis that our world has found itself now. And again, the Yoruba philosophy of work reflects secular economic principles. So the principle of secular economy suggests that we think about the ways in which we can avoid waste, ways in which we can always reuse materials, ways in which we can recycle materials. And the Yoruba traditional work practices have embedded some of these principles. For instance, when you think about women in traditional Yoruba cultural settings are practicing these secular principles when it comes to the fermentation of particular resources, just to preserve them, preservation techniques, reusing some of the waste products for some better materials. The women have always been engaging with principles of secular economy. And that brings me down to the need to talk about the gender and equity in Yoruba philosophy of work, because the challenge of gender these days is also something that we need to think about. So women are economic and ecological actors in traditional Yoruba settings. Women are not marginalized, they are not sidelined, they are very much encouraged to take upon economic activities like trading. You find them in the market. In fact, you have leaders of market like Iyaloja, who is a woman. And not only that, they are also ecological actors in the sense that their engagement with the environment is a crucial necessity for the sustenance of the family life in traditional Yoruba society. You find women's roles in herbalism. They are very knowledgeable about how you could bring about food from plants, from other environmental resources, and their food preservation techniques. Trading shows that they have low impact but resource efficient methods of work. And these are interesting and important ways in which we can think about the philosophy of work and their connection with environmental sustainability. Also, when it comes to sustainable knowledge transfer, embedded in apprenticeship and law, women are very much important in this setting. We find out that a number of times women are encouraged to learn a particular trade in traditional Yoruba settings, and some of this trade are, in a way, trades that requires them to maybe tie and dye, maybe the use of one local materials to provide to produce something that is useful for the environment. So the Yoruba work ethic promotes across age grade. So
thank you so much. We are out of time. So we have enough time for the remaining panelists. Mariana Fonseca has joined us. We welcome you. So we'll need to keep the last two to between 15 to 15 minutes ideally, so that we have a little bit of time for Q&A. Thank you, Abiodun, for a really fascinating talk, and I hope we get to talk more about it during the Q&A. And so now we'd like to welcome Bamidele Ali, who's going to talk about leveraging machine learning for climate resilient cassava price forecasting. Thank you.
Can you see my slide?
Yes. Yes, we
Okay,
can.
I will So hi, good afternoon. Thank you for welcoming me to this panel. So this project is quite of new. It was part of my MSc in Geographic Data Science. So it's I'm presenting my dissertation for the first time. So let me go to the next slide. So agriculture was, as a way of introduction, agriculture was historically one of the main revenue drivers in Nigeria until the mass production of oil and gas, particularly just before the Civil War. And after the Civil War, the status of agriculture began to decline rapidly to the benefits reaped by oil and gas industry. This decline was fueled by high global market price, sustained demand for light sweet oil available in Southeast Nigeria, and strong foreign currency revenue. Despite its historical importance, agriculture prominence waned in the face of burgeoning oil and gas. Although Nigeria is renowned oil and gas producer in sub-Saharan Africa, its economy remains driven by the agricultural sector, which employs 60 to 70% of the population, but contributes only to 40% of the country GDP, according to a mobile AG in 2016. Land use in the country faced many challenges, including insecurity, struggle for land resource between farmers and herders community. So, and also additionally, there's some environmental hazard such as drought, desertification, soil erosion, and degradation, negatively impacting crop production. So the research location for my paper was mainly Oyo State, where I'm originally from. So and also and I looked at the market. I did some investigation in Ishei, which is in the north of Oyo State, and also I looked at the market in Ibadan, the Badagry International Market, and also Mile 12 Market as well in Lagos. So I did my research last year on the ground. So the objective of of my paper. So you can see here, I went to Mobolaji Market, Bodija Market in Lagos, in Ibadan. So here you can see the street network around the market. And this is the map of Ibadan, and this is mile 12 that I visited. So as part of the literature review, I discovered that So the what I wanted to investigate. So I use GDS methodology, like looking at satellite imagery, using Python, deep learning, and machine learning as well, which are different type of AI techniques. So the focus of the researchers is on the crop yield resilience of cassava. It's a perennial staple crop for the Yoruba people. Cassava became a food staple after its introduction to Central Africa in the 16th century and to Nigeria during colonial times. And it's also considered as traditional, and it's also drought resistant to some extent. And it is a main crop in southwest Nigeria, and it grows across all season. And it has recently experienced price hikes in wholesale and retail market due to Nigeria's deteriorating economic situation, resulting from a weaker currency, depleting foreign currency reserve, and decreasing accessibility and food security. And so as part of my literature review as well, I discovered that Nigeria is one of the largest producer of cassava. And one key objectives was basically to use GDS methodology and ML machine learning to enhance crop yield resilience and climate adaptation strategy for cassava in Oyo State, given the challenge posed by the climate change and economic instability. So as part of the literature review, I listed a few points that you can see on the slide. So the main issue are climate challenges, the adaptation strategy, and also technological innovation by using machine learning or remote sensing, and also to use genetic and nutrition improvement, and for which actually I met in person Professor Olasami, which is a specialist of cassava crop. And also there's some economic and market pressures as well. There's some policy intervention possible. And basically tech policy in climate change and smart farming can be used to improve cassava resilience and to support smallholders, which is key for Nigerian food security. So the first hypothesis I wanted to solve was about the price of cassava by using machine learning techniques, cluster analysis. And then I look at also climate change data and to look at the incidence it could have as well on the price of cassava. And thanks to Professor Olasami, he gave me a lecture in his farm on the cassava cycle, why cassava is a perennial crop, and why actually it's resistant. It's also resisting climate change impact to some extent. So it could be there's no rain, and also yeah. But we can discuss this in a Q&A. So those are the results of my cluster analysis. From this analysis, I discovered that actually cassava and gari price differ significantly between Ibadan and Lagos due to market dynamics and their geographical position. And as you can see, there are commodities like cowpeas, gari, rice, and yam, which are grouped into clusters based on their pricing pattern across Lagos and Mile End markets and Ibadan, which Bodija International Market, which are both a wholesale market and a retail market. So in Ibadan, price for commodities like brown and cowpeas, gari, both white and yellow variants, maize, grain, rice were even more distributed across all sectors. This suggests a more stable market for this commodity in Ibadan, potentially to the role of Ibadan as a major agricultural production center, and also the wide distribution of prices with a lower cluster for this product indicate a consistent supply of staple and fewer extreme price fluctuation. On the other hand, in Lagos, there's a higher concentration of prices in the upper cluster 2 and 3, indicating higher price variability. This aligned with the assumption that that Lagos experienced higher demand pressure, which lead to more significant fluctuation in commodities price, such as gari, maize grain, and yam. And they show a marked difference in pricing across all sectors in Lagos compared to Ibadan. Then, and the clustering of both city results support the hypothesis that prices in Lagos are generally higher and more volatile than Ibadan due to the commercial nature of the city, which increased demand for agricultural products, place pressure on supply chain as well. And Ibadan has benefit from a proximity to cassava farm and processing centers, benefiting from lower transportation costs and a more consistent supply, leading to more stable price. My second hypothesis was about trying a different algorithm. And actually, the best algorithm was the SG02 model, as you can see here, in terms of forecasting, which shows that actually the there's a complexity on the model as well because of data quality, which we will see in the conclusion. So for my research, I discovered that the combination of machine learning model, feature engineering, and hyperparameter tuning present a significant step forward in the application of data science to agricultural resilience by offering a more accurate prediction of guide prices. The model provides a valuable insight that can help farmers and policymakers alike to make a more informed decision. And also, I also highlighted in my research challenges facing cassava production in southwestern Nigeria, ranging from climate change and market instability, requiring a multifaceted approach that integrates both tech innovation and policy support. So here you can see that I visited the farm in Ibadan. I visited the farm of Professor Olasami. This is Professor Olasami, showing me how the cassava grows. And then, as you can see, Prof, and with me. So it was more than 2 kilos, I think. And here you can see a satellite imagery of Isheyin. It's in northern Oyo, where actually you can see here that cassava is growing as well, either within the cities or outside the cities. And here you can see in West Oyo, processing cassava center into Gari. So one of the conclusions of my research and for the challenges and future direction that I addressed, the key challenge is divergent data sources, introduce uncertainty, had an issue with data quality and data availability. And also had an issue with the satellite imagery due to high humidity and cloud cover in all seasons. And there's a lack of seasonal detail in current models, early, late, and dry seasons. And future research priority include yam as a substitute crop to understand crop switching, use crowdsourced data from farmers for granular inputs, employ remote sensing techniques like SAR to overcome cloud issues, and add some different other techniques like soil fertility index, etc. And to integrate as well the UN IPCC climate projection for long-term planning. As a final takeaway, blending improved data, seasonal insight, and advanced machine learning technique can transfer cassava focusing on food security in Oyo. And my gratitude as well to Professor Dr. Akintui that I met at UNILAG last year during the LSA conference, Professor Bumi Olasami, who's a specialist of cassava, and Rotimi Obateru, PhD candidate at UI, and his father is also a famous geographer and historian. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Bamidele. And we will now have our final presenter for the day, Mariana Brox Fonseca, who will present a paper, i.e. Ehugna, the Diola Queens Who Preserve the Environment in Casamance. We welcome you, Mariana.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very
Hello.
happy to be here with you. I'm Mariana from Brazil. Um, I will talk about the Jula people. Let me open my presentation, please. Second. Onde eu apresentei? É,
There we go.
Um, I talk about Aerunia, the Jolo Queens who preserve the environment in Casamance. I'm professor of African history in Universidade Federal de Sergipe, Brazil, and currently I'm doing a postdoctoral research in Université Sanisec de Zinguinchor. Important to present the Jolo people that lives on Casamance, especially in Senegal, south of Senegal, also in Gambia and Guinea-Bissau. According to the oral traditions, they come from Egypt and successive migrations. They were targeted by slave the transatlantic period and contribute a lot of the diaspora, especially north of Brazil and south of United States. They were tributary of Gabu, the Mandinga Empire, who gave this name to Jula people, that one who pays me the tributes. So the name that they call themselves is Ajamat. The Jula identity is deeply connected with the rice production, Emano, that creates the harmony between all members of the community. And I believe the Emano was given by God, the supreme God named Atemit, Emitai. So they are monotheist people that believe God who creates everything and creates the rules, and they believe in Bashin. It's an important concept, the, the shrine where we put the libations, the offers, the sacrifice, the ancestral force materialized, the name Bashin. We refuse the concept fetishism, that we used to see the European attribute to them. The Bashin, there are many use, but it's important to understand the central concepts. The Jula people has a decentralized power. Each village are ruled by a king. The concept Ai. It's a holy king, though. We translated a high priest who coordinates the sacrifice, and he is also acts through food security. He organizes the work, distributes the resources, and he for the Kasumai, it's a central concept. The king rules for the, but it's also a word that can be used to woman. A Christian Sinajata has the concept of symmetry for language. So it's a mistranslation to say that I means king, also means can be queen. But my postdoctoral research it's about Aline Situejata, a Pretras, Ai Erunha, a woman that has a lot of spiritual power that was called by God to return to ancestral values, context of French colonization in 20th century. And She defends the traditional spirituality, connection with the nature, and she has a agenda, the opposition against the colonization, especially to the substitution of the rice cultivation by the peanuts cultivation. The peanut cultivation put the necessity of deforestation, and she was against that because the nature was sacred, and it was against also the seasonal migrations that take away the young people from the community and this uncharted the rituals. Also against the uh, inscription to the fight in World War II, the coercive taxations. In this way, she was considered dangerous by the French colonization and she was arrested and murdered in 1944 in Timbuktu. Today, she's considered like a queen. She's called Queen of Casamance, a symbol of anti-colonial resistance. And today in Senegal, she's a national heroine. But I'd like to understand the memory of this queen, this important woman in Casamance today. For this, I use the methodology of oral traditions. Um, I made many interviews between 2019 to the present of many guardians of traditions, important spiritual authorities, and it's important to present you Achilles Book. It says he is the co-author of this research. He is a dignitary, an insider, and all the interviews were made in Jula language. So he received a lot of information. In another moment, a separate moment, we do the translation, the transcription, but it's not a translation word by word, but the explication of the key concepts and another way to restore to think in African languages, no needing to translation colonized language that many times has a problem. Full on the critical decolonial theory, Chongo, Mundin, Shilimbembe, né? And also based on Africans traditionals, like Amadou Rampa Teba, Jean Vancina, and was important a very intense dialogue with dual intellectuals, called Christian Sinadiato, Mohamed Manga, to produce with the concept that the Jola consider by themselves, not outside the perspective, but trying to be more respectful and build together this research. But my focus is about this spiritual position that named Ai Erunya, that was, we can say, mistranslated by Queen of Sacred Forest. But these women are responsible to make offerings to the ancestors, to perform individual and collective healings through the community's well-being, blessings when a person goes along a journey. The female counterpart of the king is when the I man cannot resolve the problem on a social level, an economic level, and diplomatic level. He goes to call Ayehunia to do the offers to resolve in a spiritual level. So I present to you some important Ayehunia that we made these interviews. They are the primary source of not of our work. It's important to present the difference between these two concepts. Kalen Canyon, that means the sacred forest, where the initiations and the bukut it's going. It's restricted only to initiates, and there is the bujal that it's the forest that everyone can go to take the resource. It's allowed to cut in some trees to cultivate, to seed, but in Kalen can say what can see to Bois Sacré, what can say that's more sacred space. It's controlled por Amarren, roi, king that controls the territory. So they made the difference from the and there is Erunia, that's the sacred forest, especially for women. Only woman has access, and where our Erunia makes the sacrifice. It's also no Abashin for fertility and Abashin for human associations. And they decide to think. Bom, it's important to present that Zulu people has sacred trees, bufoca de figos, bubax, baobab, russana, fromager, sacred spaces where the shrines, the altars are put, where the sacrifices are made. So, to conclude, Ayehunia, there have a very special role to preservation of the environment. They protect the sixth place. They guarantee ancestral continuity. They know the secrets of the herbs and the natural healings. And the point that I'd like to share with you today is especially the importance of Jola religion and the spirituality tradition to environmental preservation. The market economy introduced by the colonies impacts the relationship between the human beings and the environment. Fight against colonialism involves fighting against the exploitation of the environment. So Aline Sitoejat agenda was also environment. When she defended the rice plantation, the rice cultivation, she's against the way that French came and decided to explore the nature, to use the nature as a resource of exploitation. So she defend the nature, the sacred nature, and it seems quite obvious, but defend the traditional spirituality means defend the nature. So it's to connect our fights today in this agenda of against climatic changements to the African real spirituality. That's it. I'm sorry I didn't take the time, but I'm sorry for my bad English, not my mother language. I hope you understand, and I'm open to the I'd like to come conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Please join me in giving a round of applause to all of our presenters today. So I want to come back to Abiodun because we have some time, and I think you were near your conclusion. I don't know if you want to if you wanted to share some summary remarks of where you were just at the part of talking about the role of women and work in Yoruba culture. I don't know if you wanted to summarize some of your concluding points to your presentation.
Yeah, if I may add one or two things to what I have said earlier. So what I would add is to connect the very philosophy of work from the Yoruba mythology that I have teased out. I will connect it with the very issues of economic productivity. So when it comes to economic productivity and the question would always come. So if we are thinking about the Yoruba philosophy of work and looking at the population growth in this era, so how are we going to balance that idea of work? What I would respond to in the face of that question is to suggest a different alternative, and the alternative that I call we growth. So we understand now that there are certain ideas around either degrowth, growth, or post-growth, and all of these concepts have their own intuitions in terms of what it means for us to conceive of work. So we growth that I am trying to respond to is, if you think about the Ubuntu idea of I am because we are. So we growth is one that is emphasizing not just the growth of the human beings in the world, but also the community and the ecological space. So in that regard, when we think about the Yoruba philosophy of work, it does not only think about the growth of the individual, that is the human prosperity, it thinks also of the flourishing of the whole community and also the environment. And that is a key part of that philosophy of work. And lastly, I admit that when it comes to the modern issues of technological change, innovations, we have AI taking over a lot of jobs. The question of how would this philosophy of work adapt to that social change is always going to be there. But nevertheless, I think that the suggestions from my hand is that the green jobs that the philosophy of work coming from the idea of Yoruba philosophy of work could offer, it is high time for us to start canonizing some of these works, start canonizing some of these indigenous ideas in such a way that it can be packaged, exported, and digital means it can also become something that is popular. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Abiodun. So our papers were really diverse in terms of coming from different disciplines, but I was thinking about the threads. Just wanted to comment on that before, as people are gathering their thoughts, if they have questions, the threads that connect the papers. And I think, Abiodun, your paper is the thread that connects all of us. So I'm talking about Indigenous knowledge as essential and forms of resistance as essential for survival. Bamidele is talking about smallholder production of cassava, leveraging technology to support smallholders. And Mariana is talking about the sacred and environmental preservation. There was a quote at I think on your last slide that really stood out. Defending African spirituality is defending nature. And I think that speaks to what Abiodun just said in terms of how to reframe work, or and these indigenous ideas in the context of a market-based economy and exploitative work. And so I found this idea of questioning the notion of work itself and thinking about the philosophy of work and distinguishing between what is exploitative and labor and market-based versus what is spiritual and cultural and respects the environment and is ethical as from its start, as being a really kind of core idea that is perhaps at the heart of all of our papers. So just trying to find those threads that connect us. But thank you all for very fascinating and enlightening papers. And with our remaining time, just want to open it up to see if there were questions in the audience. If there are questions in the audience for our presenters today that people would like to ask. Yes, please. And can you, if you don't mind, just introducing yourselves so we know who you are? And yeah. Let me hand you our presenters in here.
My name is Ridwan Magadi Shola. I'm from the Lagos State University Department of Philosophy. So I have a question for Abiodun. Yes. he made mention of some statements concerning the Yoruba conception of environmental sustainability. And he mentioned that Yoruba concept of work in its originality does not involve or rather does not integrate environmental sustainability. Then I will ask the question of, considering the fact that the Yoruba people prioritize people not going to the forest at some certain period of time, they do not, there are some certain kind of laws, taboos, restricting you from exploiting the environment. You do not work excessively at some certain point in time. Would you consider that as not a measure to ensure environmental sustainability? That's number one question. Number two question banks on your idea of work being a communal activity in the Yoruba setting. You said iṣẹ́ la fi iṣẹ́ lóògùn ìṣẹ́ múra síṣẹ́ ọ̀rẹ́ mi bí a kò bá rẹ́ni fẹ̀yìntì bí ọ̀lẹ là á rí. Probably work you need work to survive, and because if you do not work you do not have anyone to rely on, you'll be considered as being lazy. Then you need to work. So need to work is actually individual in nature. You need to work, you don't need. So I'm asking the question again that, do you think their conception of work is actually communal as you have established? Thank you very much.
Those are very good questions. Thank you. Abiodun, would you like to respond?
All right, thank you. Let me be sure that, okay, I am audible. Yeah, thank you very much, Olanrewaju. Those two questions were very, very interesting, and the questions that should get me thinking. But let me start with your first one. The fact that you pointed out some practical instances in which the Yorubas have, in a way, showcased some sort of attitudes that reflect environmental sustainability in their work. And I really admit that a number of times you would find out that the Yorubas, as they've maintained attitudes that suggest that they have in mind some conscious ideas of environmental sustainability. But the point that I'm striking in my paper is this, that when it comes to the very conception of work, it is not directly clear how the conception of work from the Yoruba traditional purview really suggests that they have a clear awareness, that is a direct awareness that they need to maintain environmental sustainability. And this is the point. There are a number of actions that people could resort to, but they are not aware of the direct consequences of those actions. So what I'm trying to do in this paper is to bring up those ideas that seems not to be directly connected, I mean by the Yorubas themselves, as the very reasons for engaging in this work is for environmental sustainability. A number of things can be argued under those kinds of work activities, that you are pointing out that do not go at this point in time to fish, or do not go at this point in time to the river or to the forest. It does not necessarily mean that they have environmental sustainability at the back of their mind at that point in time. It might be for the purpose of safety. It might be for the purpose of so many other things, not really connected to environmental. So it is not clear, not directly clear to us, but I am trying to bring out all of those things now and connecting them. Then that is the first one. The second one is the question that the need to work seem to be individual based. I did not at any point deny that work is essential for personal identity, because I made mention of the fact that the Yoruba ontology suggests that work is deeply connected to human personality. So the personal identity-based view of work is embedded in Yoruba worldview. But however, they move beyond that personal identity worldview to a communal essence of work. So that is my response. I hope it's satisfied.
Satisfied. Okay. Thank you so much. We have another question in the room.
Okay.
And please introduce yourself.
All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate all the presenters. I'm Samuel Abala from the University of Ibadan. Okay. Coincidentally, I have a question and a comment, and it will still be directed to Afolabi.
Now, I want to say that your last statement, I am not particularly convinced. One is because the issues you are referring to, the indigenous, the practices of our forefathers as Yorubas, majority of these practices were not, as it were, scripted. It was not written. They were oral traditions passed down to us, passed down to us through oral tradition. For instance, I'll give you an example. As an hunter, perhaps maybe in the day or in the night, if you go into the bush to hunt and you find two animals, mating, you are not, as a hunter, you are not expected, to kill. You are not expected to kill. And if you do, you are not regarded as a professional hunter. And one of the principles behind that is for preservation and for conservation of those animals so that they do not go into extinction. So for you to say, you may want to interrogate some of your submissions further. For you to say that our forefathers do not have environmental sustainability consciousness, I would not particularly, be absolutely correct. I want you to take a second look on that submission. Now, secondly, I've just used that scenario. I've just highlighted that just as a case in point. The second thing, you made mention of the fact that lands are owned by communities. The lands are owned by communities, and there is also the belief, of course, that the king or the village leader holds the land in trust for the community. And in some instances, the king can allocate the land to whosoever he feels, especially when it comes to development. Far back, some of the lands given to the colonial people when they came were directly given to them by the kings, in trust for the entire community. So I want you to clarify that submission. Thank you very much.
Thank you for another excellent question.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. So let me start with the last. The last on the very idea of land ownership. Yes, I agree with you with all that you've said as regards sometimes the kings taking possession of lands, and whether we like it or not, the kingship style is also part of the Yoruba tradition, and the very fact that the king holds possession of lands and could allocate to whoever he deems fit does not necessarily contradict that is a communal entity, because whether we regard the king as the traditional elder of the community at that point in time, is a fact that we also understand that he has the responsibility of safeguarding the very laws of the land at that point in time. So if the king holds land in trust, for me, I could still regard that king as a representative of the community, a representative of the community. I mean, the one who the gods have appointed for that particular community at that point in time. So I could still see it in that regard as land being one that is owned by the community and not necessarily the king per se. Then the second one, yes, I get your point. I understand what you're saying, that the attitudes of environmental sustainability exist in traditional Yoruba society. I do not have anything against that. But here is my point, and please just get it clearly so that maybe you could hold me on those points. What I'm saying is this, that a number of attitudes that we strictly align with environmental conservation, we are not strictly, a number of them, I'm not saying all of them, a number of them, we are not attitudes that are directly linked to environmental conservation. And it is our responsibility as scholars to tease out some of those attitudes. And I am saying in essence again that when it comes to the very idea of work, the approach, modern approach of environmental sustainability, we are not all that clear in the approach of work in the Yoruba traditional settings. So we have a responsibility as scholars to start thinking about ones that could that were slightly not in tandem with the reasoning of environmental sustainability, and to start picking them up. And let me cite one example. And I'm sorry for taking our time. The example is this. In traditional Yoruba society, Iroko tree used to be fearsome because they regard it as homes of spirits. So while that approach seemed to me, or perhaps to any one of us, as an environmental sustainability approach, but I tell you that there is a lot more in that very attitude. That being an home to spirit and scaring people away from environmental, from Iroko trees, I mean, it has limited us from relating with Iroko trees in the way and in the manner in which we can get to know more or much about Iroko trees. I'm not saying that in the attitude of exploiting it. I mean, relating with those trees could bring a whole lot of emotional feelings other than fear. And this is what a traditional ontology has made us to hold on to when it comes to ideas of conservation. So it is not everything that we will need to take on board as really connected to environmental sustainability. There is more to some of those attitudes during those periods, and we have to tease them out in this modern era. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very, very.
Yes. Yeah. You have a question? Wait. Who is next? Okay. Is it directly to? Okay. Let him and then you. Is that okay? Okay.
Thank you. My name is Destiny Siguzo from Abia State University. I think, let me react to what the last speaker said. I think you should be a bit dispassionate about your work so that you could be more receptive to new ideas. Your attitude towards your argument needs to be re-examined so that some of the issues that are valid you can also put them in consideration when you are revising your work. But that being said, the African attitude towards work is that of subsistence. That is the immediate survival of maybe the person and the family. It wasn't capitalist. The indigenous African attitude in terms of culture, in terms of everything, is subsistence. You feed your family and maybe one or two persons immediate relations. It has not been capitalist as amassing wealth. It's you and your family. So I think you should look at it in that direction. Even your assertion that some of these mythologies in themselves are approach to preservation. The instance you cited that about Europe is an hypothesis of nature. When you say that a tree has the spiritual significance, that is towards conservation. I don't think that is towards exploitation. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We have one more comment in the room and then a last question online.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. I just want to react to the last statement of the presenter. My name is Adekoke Folashade from Forestry Research Institute of Nigeria. The forester, actually, the nature of Africans or the Black people, we don't really work towards conservation. I would want to support what he said in the last statement. But we've not, especially, I'm talking in terms of the forestry area. As a forester, what we are trying to do, because we notice that Africans, they will just go into the bush, cut down the trees. You know, little by little, these trees, they are going into extinction. Like he mentioned Iroko. Like Iroko has been recorded as one of the endangered species. They are scarce now. So some of these tree species, in order to safeguard them, this species, that's why we restricted some people, and we made some areas to be restricted from invasion of people to just go inside there. We call it external, street nature itself. That is, it is forbidden for people to just come down there and cut down trees. However, people still go, they still enter in one way or another to cut down the trees. That's why we now make it a mandatory that once you cut down a tree, you replace with one or replace with two. Cut one, replace with two. So, and like that, we can now begin to change our attitude towards conservation, because by the time we begin to destroy our environment, it is affecting this. That's the reason why we're having the problem of climate change all over. So I just want to back up the last statement of the last speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you for adding that perspective. And Sunday, yes, you will have the last question. We're at time. If you could say your question briefly, and then and we'll conclude. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. This panel is quite interesting. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, very well.
Okay, and I just want to add my views to what others have said about Yoruba people integrating environmental sustainability in their work. I also agree with them, and I disagree with the presenter, that Yoruba people, they directly, consciously, and deliberately integrate environmental sustainability in their work life. For instance, if you're a fisherman, there are certain things you don't do around water bodies. They believe that there are gods who live in these water bodies, and all of these are aimed at preserving the biodiversity of that water body. Now, the only thing is that these environmental sustainability approaches are hidden under taboos. They are hidden under the fear of gods. And for me, the question now should be that, given the changes in our belief systems, for how long would the fear of God help us to enhance environmental sustainability? For how long will it help us to enhance environmental conservation? So they have it implicitly in their work life. Not that we are trying to tease it out. It is already there, but then it is hidden under taboos, under laws, and that is what has sustained the environment up till now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sunday. I wish we could continue on that, because I think there's more opinions in the room, but I really appreciate that last point. And thank you all for such really good questions. I think all of our presenters gave us a lot of food for thought. Wish we could have heard more from Bamidele and Mariana, but hopefully we can stay in touch. You have their contact information. And thank you. One more round of applause for our panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Well done. Take good care. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
I would like to ask, what's your interest in this
Yeah. So, okay. So I've been doing work in for like 20 years, focusing more on water infrastructure, like access to water, help communities around this Lagos State. I also do work in those states, the communities that don't have access to clean water. How are they surviving? What are they doing? How do they negotiate with government? What is the government policy and all of that? So that was like my dissertation. That was the core of my work. But over time, I've started working more and more with communities, both here in the United States and in other countries, that are fighting not just for water, but for like the total Kavame, just the lack of infrastructure is tied to not being able to live, to, you know, keep getting forced out. Your space is invalid, it's blighted, it's dirty. We have to redevelop. We want to redevelop the place and not the people.